If you've been paying attention to music news lately, then you've most likely heard about how the sync placement in Stranger Things has catapulted Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill back to the top of the charts. We're going to talk about sync licensing today, what it is, why it's so powerful, and how you can tap into it at CD Baby. So let's get to it.
You're listening
to the CD Baby
CD Baby
CD Baby
DIY
Musician
Podcast.
Welcome to episode number 309 of the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast. My name is Kevin Bruner, and joining me today is Christina Cano. Christina, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Doing well. Yes, Chris is enjoying a beach vacation this week, and
Lucky.
so we get the pleasure of having you on the podcast with me today, and it's exciting times. It's summer, lots going on. I'm getting ready to go play some shows next week, which should be fun. A little mini tour. We're in the middle of planning a gigantic conference.
Sure are. We sure
Lots
are. Yeah, I
going
wish I could go on tour right now. It's but the conference is basically like a week-long gig. So yeah, I'm getting in gig mode.
Yeah, it is. It is. It does feel like the gig where you're the promoter, the planner, the artist, where you have to just do it all.
Sometimes a performer.
Yeah, all of it.
Love it.
Yeah, so exciting times. Yeah, and speaking of the conference, the DIY Musician Conference is right around the corner, and you need to be there.
You do.
If you haven't got your tickets yet, head on over to DIYmusiciancon.com. There's so many great sessions and people attending that you're going to want to see. The live band makeover is back. That's always a highlight.
Super cool to watch.
Yes, that's something it's always impressive. Every time I wonder, is it going to work this time? And it always works. It's always amazing. And especially as artists think about going back out on the road, playing shows again, I think getting your live show in order is a must.
Totally.
Who are some of the other keynotes? We just announced them this week.
Well, I'm really sort of excited about our opening keynote. Their name is Carnage the Executioner.
Wow.
So really, really cool, inspirational, sort of like a live looping, beatboxing, motivational singer, rapper, speaker. Really excited about that. We've got Austin Kleon, writer of Steal Like an Artist, is going to be doing a brand new keynote with us.
Yes.
We've got Cara DiGuardi and Ross Golan from And the Writer Is. Cara is a multi-award-winning songwriter, judge of American Idol at one point, and they're going to be doing the Songwriter Shark Tank. So basically giving critique on people's songs, which is scary and fun.
Yeah, both Cara and Ross have written songs you have absolutely heard. If you look them up online, you'll see that. I know Ross has written songs for everyone from Pitbull to Maroon 5 to all sorts of pop artists like that. And Cara, she wrote a big portion of one of Christina Aguilera's albums and has done some work for Britney Spears. So both of them are very accomplished songwriters that you have heard their music, their songs before, as many artists record them. And yeah, those are some of the highlights. There's going to be topics that cover everything from booking shows to some music production to live streaming to all sorts of marketing topics. It's really going to be an event to just catapult your career and really just just kind of reset after the last couple of years of the pandemic. And if you can't be in Austin, very important, it is a hybrid event. So you can stream it live. One ticket gets you access either to watch online or to attend in person. So head on over to DIYmusiciancon.com to get your tickets. And if you book 2 or more nights in the hotel, which you're going to want to be at the hotel, it's an amazing hub of activity from morning till night, all night. If you get 2 room nights or more, we will give you your ticket for free. And all that information is on the website at DIYmusiciancon.com. And we hope to see you in Austin very soon. It's just around the corner, Christina.
You're going to have FOMO if you're not there. That's all I'm going to say. It's been 2 years. You haven't hung out with your artist friends. Show up or be sad.
Yes.
That's our pitch.
There's been enough sadness, so you might as well show up and be happy.
Yeah.
And the pool party afterwards.
You keep telling everyone about the pool party.
Well, last time I kept telling people about the pool party, and I was surprised that very few people outside of the CD Baby crew. We had an amazing time. There was about 30 or 40 of us having drinks in the pool and having a great time. But you said there'd be floaties this year, so I'll be disappointed if there aren't floaties.
Yep. Thanks for reminding me of something to put on my list. But there
The
will
to-do
be
list for today.
floaties.
5 floaties for pool party. All right.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time. Hope to see everybody there.
Yep. And one last time, DIYmusiciancon.com. That's August 26th through 28th in Austin, Texas, or online if you are unable to make it to Austin, and we hope to see you there. All right, for today's episode, here's our table of contents. We're going to talk about what is sync licensing exactly. It's been a while since we've really talked about it on the podcast, and it's been in the news a lot lately, particularly with Stranger Things, like I mentioned at the top of the show, which has also catapulted Metallica back onto the charts as well for one of their songs that was used in the show. So then we're going to talk about why it's so powerful and why you should care and look at that as an opportunity. We're going to review some helpful terms. When people start talking about sync licensing, there can be terms that, jargon that if you don't understand what they're saying, you might miss what they're talking about. And then we're going to later on in the episode bring on Brett Byrd, who does our sync licensing here at CD Baby. We're going to talk about how sync licensing works at CD Baby. And then we don't have any calls today. It goes like feast or famine at times, but somebody did send in a scam email. So we're going to read that and laugh and enjoy. It's going to be a good episode, so stick around for all of it.
Sync licensing. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
Well, first of all, you mentioned Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill. What an incredible thing to happen where an entire new generation can get like completely absorbed by a song that was written years before they were even conceived. It's really, I mean, of course that happens. Like I love Steely Dan, but that doesn't mean that I would have I didn't hear Steely Dan because of a TV show that just came out,
Yeah. No, this has been really interesting because I don't know if I would say that this is possibly it could possibly be one of the biggest impacts a sync placement has ever had. It's tough to say because sometimes, you have a sync placement that's in a big Apple commercial and that catapults that person's career. But this has to be one of the biggest cultural impacts a song has ever had because of a sync placement. At CD Baby, what's been amazing to see is that, especially around the time I started working at CD Baby, so many independent artists were having breakout moments because of sync licensing and sync placements. Ingrid Michaelson is one of them. Back in the day, she was used in a Grey's Anatomy episode and then Old Navy commercial. And those two things alone just exploded her career.
Grey's Anatomy was really good at that. Every single episode would have some iconic song or covers of iconic songs. So that gives then the cover artist an opportunity to get discovered too. But one of the ones that I remember the most from when I was in my early 20s, which is going to date me a little bit, but the OC was a big show. And there was an Imogen Heap song that was used. And that was super big at that time, or that show was super big at that time. So then that song just completely blew up. She blew up. It was awesome.
What show was it?
The OC.
Oh, the OC. Yes. Our band had a song in the OC, did not explode us though.
Oh, well, it wasn't then in the pivotal finale when Marissa got shot.
No, it wasn't. But those are all important things. Between both of us, for our music, we both have had a decent amount of sync placements. And I think that's something that's important. It's important for people to understand that not every sync placement's going to give you the running up that hill result.
No, sometimes they won't even use your song, in my experience. But at least
or sometimes they say they use your song and you watch the show and you're like, I watched that show with the volume cranked from start to finish,
I know.
and I didn't hear our song in there, but they paid us. They said it was there. So yeah, sync licensing is pretty interesting because there's all sorts of different types of usages, and I think between the two of us, we've experienced a lot of them from commercial or film, like independent film, or I've had a few TV show placements, and they all can pay different levels. They can all have different impacts on your career. Most of them probably don't have a lot of cultural impact like the what we're seeing with Kate Bush, but
Mhm.
it's still an amazing revenue stream. And I think one of the things that the Kate Bush placement absolutely highlights, and what I love about sync licensing, is that it doesn't matter when the music came out. It's not
Oh,
about the latest, hippest release. It's about what serves the production. And so that can be a lot of opportunity across the board. And I know when we have Brett come on a little bit later in the show, that's going to be some of the opportunities and placements that CD Baby has gotten, is like it's unique music, it's time periods, it's there's all sorts of ways people could be looking for music, and we'll have a Brett kind of talk through that. But let's start out by defining what sync licensing is, because if you're new to it, it can get confusing, especially in the digital world, because there are some usages that happen every day, like on YouTube, that are technically a sync placement, but it doesn't necessarily pay out the same way. But I'm going to define it right here. Sync licensing, or synchronization, is the use of music and visual media such as TV, film, advertisements, trailers, or video games. It literally describes the synced pairing of audio and visual. And in the narrow sense, the sync license specifies the negotiated terms of that usage, the placement, the permissions, the payments. It's an agreement between the owner of the visual media and the owner of the music. And with sync licensing, there isn't necessarily like a one size fits all deal. A lot of times very bespoke to
mm,
the specific usage. And as an independent artist, oftentimes you don't have much leverage, but those deals are pretty, they can have pretty quick standard deals, or based on how they use the song. Like, the example we've been using today, Kate Bush, I'm sure they had a long conversation about that one, because it is used over and over and over in the show as sort of a plot piece. And that really put the emphasis. So, yeah, but basically taking audio, putting it to video. Let's talk a little bit about why it's so powerful. What are your thoughts on that? Why do you think it's so powerful, Christina?
I think that there's a lot there. First of all, I hear artists all the time saying, "How do I make money in music?" And I think that sync licensing is actually your best avenue for that in a lot of ways, as far as making like substantial big bucks. Sync licensing is usually the best ticket. I think that it's really cool that artists like CD Baby artists in particular, I know that we're going to talk about it later, but hearing about how some of our artists have been placed in like The Handmaid's Tale or other HBO shows. And it's like very cool to see that an artist that may not have ever even had the reach, maybe in their local scene, to be able to reach that many people, even locally, or they just haven't gotten there yet, could then be expounded onto like the global scale. So it's a really great platform. And as we're creating more media every single day, I mean, there's streaming platforms for shows and movies like every single day. I think there's a new one. I can't keep track of them. There's only going to be more need for this. So this is a really great time, I think, for artists to be trying to chase those opportunities. And I'm really excited about what's happening because I too have benefited from it. So hey.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that when you get into it and start really focusing on it, you realize how much music is
Mhm.
used. And it's pretty amazing when you look at like a modern film and then go compare it to a film like from the 60s or 70s, and realize how little music was used in older films compared to today, especially like an
Yes,
action movie. There's barely a second in the film where there's not some sort of music happening. It's used so much in TV, and opportunities like video games have really exploded sync licensing opportunities, because there's video games where they basically have a soundtrack running
right.
while you're playing. And so there's lots of new media that's opened up. So for a while, because I was doing sync licensing for CD Baby back in 2008, and it was kind of this interesting time. A lot of these like video games were just starting to use music, but a lot of people were also getting into sync licensing. I'm like, is there too much music? Is there too much competition? But the music just keeps getting used more and more
Mhm.
and more in productions. And I think one of the reasons why, you take, I think the Ingrid Michaelson example is probably better than the Kate Bush one for like why it's so powerful. It's like you have these the Grey's Anatomy at that time. Grey's Anatomy was always having. I think every episode had a dramatic ending where they played a song, and it
Mhm.
was sort of a
Still
feature
do.
for that artist. But the artist, it's just this dramatic scene happening, and it really just, I think, takes the emotion of what you're seeing visually and puts it infuses into the song, and where the song's doing the same thing to the visuals that are happening, and I think people just have a
Um,
stronger connection to the music as the music is making them have a stronger connection to the visuals,
it's almost
and
like you're getting your own free, and then you're also getting paid for it, like big budget music video for your song.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, especially those Grey's Anatomies one.
Yeah.
They were That's basically what they were like.
It's been interesting. I've been watching a lot of older movies lately and trying to think because I'm to be completely transparent here, also chasing these opportunities a lot, trying to find more of them because I find them to be really awesome. Like, I'll just, it's also just really fun to maybe get licensed to like compose specifically for something. That's a really fun and sort of a little different of an avenue than what we're talking about. But I've been listening to a lot of soundtracks and trying to sort of deconstruct them. So there's the sound composer, right? Like someone like a Hans Zimmer who's hired to make the entire composition for the movie. And then you've got your Ingrid Michaelson song that pops up at the end of Grey's Anatomy. So those are like two separate things.
Yep.
And so when you watch older movies, you find that generally the composition of the film was like just made by one person. And then there's movies like I was just watching Sleepless in Seattle, where every single song is an oldie. Every single song is definitely like they licensed that song for that movie. It's fun to watch like really, really low budget movies where they didn't have the budget to pay for some like high budget songs. Like they couldn't pay for like a Beatles song. So then they hire someone else to write like a really bad knockoff. And those, I mean, that's an opportunity. So
Yeah.
there's so many different ways to get music into films or TV or even YouTube videos these days that it's cool to see all the different sort of avenues that people can take to get there.
Yeah, yeah, and let's talk about the rights involved there, because there are two rights that have to be cleared, and I think this is if you're an artist listening, you're like, I want to get into sync
Mhm.
licensing. There's two rights that you will be asked about when with any opportunity, and one is a master use license. And when you hear people talking about a master use license, what they're talking about is the sound recording, and that's the negotiation around using a particular sound recording. The fee, depending on the type of placement, is usually paid upfront or around the time the production is released. A lot of times these you get paid for these when the production is released. The other you might hear referred to as a sync license for the song or the publishing, and same thing, negotiated, and oftentimes the sound recording, the master use license is what they go and try and secure first. As an independent artist, if you write and record your own music, you own both of these. So that's why independent artists are an easy go-to for people that are placing music, because they can typically clear it all in one stop. So those are the two things. So that means if someone comes to you, if you've got a cool cover song,
Right.
you can license that, but you can only speak for the master use license.
Right. I've
They
been
you
in a
can
situation where I was working with an artist. We were trying to get them a placement. It was like a commercial was trying to lease a song that they had done, but the song they did was cover. So unfortunately, while they had the budget to pay for one license, they weren't able to pay for the cover for the publishing of the song. So it unfortunately didn't pan out because the song was a cover. So it's not always going to be great if it's a cover.
Yeah, and it depends on whose song it is, and I know somebody over at Sony Music Publishing, and he told me that the publishing typically follows the master, meaning that most of the time the publisher's gonna say yes. However, there are some people that will be like, "No, you're not
Yeah.
gonna license my song."
This was like
And
a Taylor
so
Swift song, so it just wasn't
yeah,
gonna happen, but
yeah, yeah, if you do a cover and you can clear the master, that oftentimes is an opportunity for you because they can't afford to pay the big artists, very recognizable, famous track. They can't afford to pay to license that, so they'll get an independent artist who did a cool cover of it, and they can afford to clear that.
and if you're listening to this and you're wondering, how am I supposed to keep track of all these things? The good news is if you are a CD Baby artist, our sync licensing team will help you out with that. And then if you're not and you have a sync company, like a licensing company that you're signed to, they should be helping you out with that. So it can be really confusing, but generally if you have the right team in your corner, they can handle some
Yeah.
of that heavy lifting for you.
Yeah, and most of these placements, they're gonna be, especially if it's TV, it's usually a quick turnaround. It's a flat fee. They'll say we want it in perpetuity, meaning they're not gonna wanna come back every time it's now on some new streaming platform or some service we didn't know existed when we did this. It's gonna be like, here's, for an independent artist and like TV placement, $2,000 is pretty normal for just like a song in a show that's not a feature, that's just background music. That's pretty standard, and it's gonna be like a take it or leave it. You're not gonna have a lot
Mhm.
of negotiating power. TV commercials typically pay the most out of anything. We've had independent artists make tons of money on that.
Yeah.
Brett will get into that later. But the other way you can make money from sync licensing is some of the usages will create performance royalties, and that can also kick off a lot of
Yes.
money
If your song
in the
makes
back.
it into syndication or if that movie gets played a million times, like, you're set for life, my friend. I know somebody who recently just found out that years later, they didn't know because they were signed to a label, that their song had been used in a commercial, and they got a check later about it, and they were like, "Okay, well, I can buy a house now."
Yeah, I this was a while ago, but I was sharing an office with somebody at CD Baby who had his own label, and one of his artists, which was just this electro pop band in Portland that was brand new, got placed in I think it was like an IBM commercial, and then that commercial was licensed again in Europe and then worldwide, and then Target used them, and then in store. It's like this one song that got placed basically made them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it was a real weird experience for them because it wasn't like they were had this huge fan base or following, but suddenly they could afford a house and to eat and
Amazing.
all the things artists dream about doing.
Well, one other thing too that I think is really special about this is that your catalogs, when the song came out, doesn't really apply here. So it's like what song fits, not what's your most relevant song. And I know that as artists, we're often like just really stuck on, well, this song came out 6 months ago. It's old news by now, you know?
Yeah,
And I find that the ones that get used the most of mine are songs that I wrote 10 years ago that are still getting picked up for like a podcast or a documentary or for the intro of a movie. Like those sorts of things can happen years and years later after you think that you've well put that song to bed. So
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
pretty cool aspect of it.
Yeah, a band that I'm no that's no longer together that I had here in Portland called Hello Morning. We had a song that it came out in I think the song was out in 2010, but it just got placed in Joe versus Carol, the docudrama of the Tiger King.
Cool.
And it's funny because it's like in this scene where he's being taken to jail and he's sitting there in jail all sad, and then you hear my guitar playing, and
Oh
it's
my
just
gosh. That's so exciting.
and yeah, the thing that was amazing, it's like this music is still valuable. It's still finding its way places. It's not, even though that band's not together, I'm still very proud of that catalog, and it can still find a place with sync licensing. And so that's one of the things that I love about sync licensing. Those kind of things can happen and you love it when you get those emails or those calls. Let me hit a couple terms that you need to know when talking about sync licensing or just things that you'll encounter. One, music supervisor. You'll hear that term all the time. Oh, you need to connect with music supervisors. Who are they? Well, music supervisors are hired by the production, whether it's a TV commercial, movie trailer, or webisode of something. They're hired by whoever's putting that together to curate the music that shows up inside that show or movie. And I think it's important that you understand their role, that they are trying to help the people making the movie, the TV show, create some sort of experience or vibe with the music. And it has to be fitting for the production. It has to, be useful for that production. So they just can't throw anything in there. They're going for something specific.
They're like the ultimate DJ. It seems like a really fun job, but I bet it is so stressful having to find the right vibe and also make sure that you're hitting your budget, because I'm sure that there are people that are like, well, I just want to put Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill. And it's like, none, you can't afford that
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah. Yeah, you are correct. I've talked to a lot of music supervisors and spent some time with some of them and have gone to a music supervisor conference. It is high stress because of the next thing. Another term you will hear often is it pre-cleared? Are both sides cleared? You'll hear that a lot, especially pre-cleared. And that's a term that's used to mean that the rights involved, the master recording and the publishing, or at least they might talk about just be talking about the master recording. Are they pre-cleared? And what that means is that the music supervisor does not have to wait for you, either the artist or the agent working on behalf of the artist, to go get everyone's permission to use it in a show or a movie or a video game. This really comes into play with TV because TV is really quick and nothing will burn your bridges faster and potentially get a music supervisor fired if you represent rights and say yes that you have clearance when you don't.
Right.
So that's why for a music supervisor, it's very stressful. And I have heard stories. In fact, one of the biggest ones that there was a big lawsuit with the Beastie Boys where somebody at the advertising agency who should have known better stuck their song in and everyone just assumed they had clearance.
Oh,
And they
no.
ran this nationwide commercial and the Beastie Boys were like, we didn't give you permission to do
Oh
that. And
my
this was back
God.
when they didn't do placements. Clearly, they've changed their their mind with that now because they do it all the time. But and there was a big lawsuit, and they ended up winning, I think, several $1 million from it. But yeah, whoever was involved with that, I'm sure they got fired because that is just something that you don't mess around with. It can get out of hand really fast. So the other term and I mentioned like both sides, you'll hear that a lot. And that what they mean is like the publishing and the
Sure.
master recording. And why music supervisors love independent music. One, they can typically find more diversity in genre and mood and style than they can with just like label artists. And two, that they typically represent the publishing and the master recording because they write and record their music. And so it's an easy transaction. And I think three, music supervisors, they actually like finding new talent and being the one to say they discovered or they included that person in a production before anybody knew how cool they were. So there is some of that going on in that world as well.
Yeah, I sometimes get to go sit in at Downtown Music, which is our parent company, has a big sync licensing team. And it's really fun to sit in the office when they're in because, they'll often just be talking to one another, being like, hey, for this movie, we really need like a Bob Dylan-esque independent folk singer-songwriter. And then they're just like shouting names off. I'm like, hey, I know that band. I know that band. And I'm like really rooting for my people's bands to like get chosen for these songs. And so it's a really fun environment, I'm sure, to some degree, but yeah, I bet it sounds really stressful too.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing with productions, especially TV, because it moves really fast, and it can be, with a lot of them, but movies take years, so there's a little bit more time when they're placing the music. But it can be a game time decision. I knew an artist that was gonna have a song in a Super Bowl commercial, and he was saying that it was between his song and someone else's song, and this was like right before the Super Bowl. I was texting him asking him, "Hey, did they pick your song?" He said they still hadn't decided, and they said it was gonna. He'd basically find out when the commercial aired during the halftime
Wow,
of the Super Bowl.
I can't
So
imagine.
so sometimes it's really stressful. They've got these things temped in, and they don't know if they want to use this song or that song. Um, so yeah, it's a exciting and interesting world of the music business. And before we bring Brett on, I think the last thing I'd really say is, you're thinking, okay, I want to look into sync licensing. How do I do it? You could reach out to music supervisors yourself and find out what they're working on. And if your music is appropriate for the production they're working on, pitch something. There are licensing companies out there. There's lots of different licensing companies. Some of them focus on TV and film, some of them focus on video games or other usages, because there's a lot of usages that aren't necessarily even public, whether it's corporate videos like internal training videos or webisodes and things that you may not be thinking about, but there's some companies that focus in on those opportunities. So there's what we have at CD Baby, and where it's you just check a box and your music goes into our catalog, and we deal with music supervisors. So there's lots of different ways you can start getting engaged with sync licensing. If you haven't checked that box in CD Baby, just log into your account. You need to do it for each release.
Go into your song information, and then you can just choose that you opt into sync licensing. It's under sync and monetization, and you can also opt in or opt out at any point. So if let's say you get signed to a licensing label and they say, well, we have exclusivity on your catalog, and that might mean that you need to come in and cancel your licensing. So it's very easy to do. It's not anything you even have to write in about. You just log into your dashboard and opt out, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
let's say that label sucks and you decide that you really want us to do it again and you leave them, then you can just go in and opt back in.
Yeah. And some licensing companies have very small curated catalogs where they only work with a handful of artists and they're really intentional about getting placements. Some of them have larger catalogs, what we do, which service some broader needs, or maybe have wider opportunity in what people might want to come to us for, whether it's period music or um, the hot latest indie, or just something unique and interesting that they're trying to find. But yeah, so that's basically a rundown of sync licensing, what it is, some terms you need to know. But now let's jump to our chat with Brett Byrd, who runs sync licensing here at CD Baby, about how sync licensing works at CD Baby. Well, joining us now is Brett Byrd, manager sync licensing of CD Baby. That's your title, right, Brett?
That
Manager sync.
is that is my title, manager of sync
Excellent.
licensing.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you on the podcast. Christina and I have already been talking about what sync licensing is and talking about it from a general sense. Lots of interest in the topic after Stranger Things with Kate Bush and Metallica, both having
Of course.
placements that have done things for their career, very noticeably breaking chart history and all that kind of stuff. And so we wanted to have you on to talk through about how it actually works at CD Baby, because that's what you do every day. And so artists understand how this is a real opportunity for them. It's free, it comes with their distribution. They just have to opt in. But wanting to understand a little bit how it works, anything that artists should know, and strategies and trends and all that kind of stuff. So welcome.
Thanks for having me. I literally just got off a panel a little earlier today about sync licensing, so I'm ready to go. Got all my information handy. But yeah, thanks for having me. And sync is awesome, and just pointing out Stranger Things and how it kind of vaulted sync back into the spotlight again, kind of like shows like the OC and Grey's Anatomy things did 10, 15 years ago. The focus is really on sync again, and that's not just for big artists like Kate Bush and Metallica. That's for indie artists as well. And Stranger Things in particular uses a lot of indie artists. I was fortunate enough to pitch quite a bit of content for Stranger Things this year. Didn't land anything, unfortunately. That's just kind of how sync goes. But in season 3, we did place 2 songs in Stranger Things. So we have had success in Stranger Things. It just wasn't in this new
Wow.
season.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. I'm curious, when you are pitching to a project like that, tell me just like an average of how many different artists or songs you might be pitching, and maybe like how many you get back in return.
Yeah, it's hard to say. With Stranger
Yeah.
Things in particular, I pitched a lot of content. I know the supervisor very well. I've worked with her on multiple different projects. She was looking for a lot of music to fill the show because, especially with Stranger Things, obviously they had the big couple marquee songs, but then they got to fill the rest of the show with music
Mhm.
that they can afford, which is where indie libraries come in. But to tackle on top of that, it's not just me that they're coming to. They're going to labels, they're going to publishers, they're going to other indie sync houses. So for one spot, there's hundreds of songs up for that one spot. So you never know what's going to work. It really comes down to the editor in the end and
Mhm.
how it plays out to the actual scene that they're editing to, whether that's TV commercials, film, things like that. So there's a lot of songs up for one spot. But I'd say on a typical playlist that I send out, I'm probably sending 10 or so songs,
Mhm.
depending on what they ask for. Some supervisors say, please limit to your five best.
Mhm.
Some will be like, hey, we're gathering music for the complete season. Send as many songs as you want. So I'll be sending, for those ones, sometimes upwards of 30 songs. Then a lot of times they come back for a second round and it just kind of goes from there.
What's like the spec look like when you receive it from them? Does it say like we're looking for moody electronic music, or is it a little more general?
Some are very general like that. Some are way more in detail.
Mhm.
A lot of times there will be a reference track that is unaffordable for them for what their budget is of a bigger artist. And so they're looking to replace that vibe or style. Sometimes they'll just give you the genre. Some searches they're looking for artists from a specific location. Last week I was working on one. They wanted artists specifically from New England and tracks from the 80s. So that one was, very
Oh,
specific. So,
that's
we with our broad catalog, I do get a lot of requests that aren't your typical sync requests. I still get all the same ones that you hear, all the big shows, commercials, trailers, things like that. But we do get some more unique requests that are looking for specific locations, specific era, things like that.
location. Interesting.
Yeah. So let's talk about how for CD Baby that those requests typically come in, um, like from supervisors, or if you're just pre-pitching, knowing that they're working on stuff. Let's talk about how that works, so artists understand like what you do with the CD Baby catalog, or how the interactions with the music supervisors are. Because I know it's, we, like you said, we have a very big catalog, which is unique and helps us in a lot of areas, especially for those time, those time periods, or very specific locations and such. But what is an average interaction with a music supervisor like for the CD Baby catalog, and what you're and how you're helping them?
Yeah, so a brief from a supervisor comes in, mostly email. Sometimes they call me in if they have a really quick turnaround. Um, Typically, they'll give me a deadline of when they need the music by, and so I get it to them. I'll send them a streaming link from our platform. That's a live streaming link, so they could always go back to it. And then from there, it just all kind of just depends. If nothing lands, I'm probably not going to hear back on that specific project. If they have interest, then at that point they'll send a quote request, which has budget, type of use, things like that. They'll gather the writer information, the PROs if they're affiliated. And then from there, that quote stays open pretty much until the episode or whatever the project is released. And then usually confirmation after that. Sometimes I get it before something airs. Sometimes I don't know until afterwards. It just depends on the production,
Mhm.
who's doing the clearance in their process. Some places don't start the clearance process until the series is over. Some do the clearance process as they know songs are being confirmed.
And at some point, do they say something like, we will like just the stems of the song, or like the instrumental version, or are those sorts of things not generally asked for?
It depends on the use. Instrumentals are asked for quite a bit.
Yeah.
And usually I'll reach out to the artist and be like, hey, I have interest in if I'm able to say what the project is, I'll let them know
Yeah.
and kind of give them what their fee is going to be for if the song is used. Most of the time the artists get back pretty quick if they have them. A lot of times they just want to have the instrumental on hand in case they need it. But a lot of times in TV and film, it's going to be a background use anyway.
Mhm.
So lyrics don't really matter. It's more for,
Mhm.
the trailers, the commercials, or if it's like an opening or end credit scene, things like that. But for your standard background use, if someone's in a bar, there's bar music playing or whatever it is, or action scene, less the lyrics take away from the voiceover. They don't necessarily need the instrumental, but they do like to have them. So I do get requests probably, I'd say probably about 25% of the things that I'm working on that might have a chance to land. I do get instrumental requests, and then I go back to the artist to see if they have them. So I mean that's a note for artists who are listening.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just as a
Totally.
general note, and I know we've probably talked about it a ton on the podcast. Know what your instrumentals and stems are, and have them handy. And that's not just for sync via CD Baby. If you're looking to get sync rep from any other company, they're going to want those things as well.
Yeah,
Totally.
that's a good reminder for artists. And just for clarity, if anyone's confused, an instrumental, just mute the vocal. That's all you need. Just with no vocals. That's what we're talking about. You don't have to do a interpretation with like, hey, this is
Oh,
the instrument. We're not
yeah.
looking for music here. It
We
means
don't
mute
need
the
you to
vocal.
put the
'Cause
guitar line, like the melody. Please don't.
yes, no, don't do that. When you're dealing with your audio engineer, also just stress that you just need the vocal muted, because I've had the situation where the person's like, well, if I do that, it won't sound good as an instrumental and I need to remix it and do that. I'm like, that's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is the exact track without the vocal. So if they use it, it's the exact same musical experience, and then they can pop into the chorus with the vocal if they want to.
And just bounce out an instrumental track.
Yes,
Sometimes
yes.
I have heard it will they'll mute like the main lyrical vocal, but like oohs and ahs that sort of add texture. Is that would you say that that means mute that as well, or would you say
I mean,
that's
if they have the oohs and ahs as a separate vocal track, that's one thing. But if it's not, if it's on the same vocal track as the main vocals, then there's
sure,
that's
of
going to
course.
get muted anyway. Oohs and ahs, you're right. They do add texture, and a lot of times those don't necessarily need to be muted. Oohs and ahs are kind of popular in sync right now, so it's probably better if they're not.
Hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
but
Ooh, more oohs and ahs on the next
more oohs and
record.
ahs.
Well, that leads me to my question is, are you seeing any trends with what's popular right now, what you're getting asked for more of?
Yes. I mean, trends in sync, they're kind of always ongoing.
Yeah,
You know, especially lyrical themes. They always want the non-romantic love song, so it could apply to any sort of love, whether it's family love or a relationship love. So there's that. They're always looking for like the empowerment type of songs, female empowerment specifically.
mhm.
And then the one that I'm kind of seeing this year, Christmas songs that don't sound overtly Christmas. Like it's not, not saying Merry Christmas, or
Just like
it has
jingle,
that.
jingle, jingle, white snow.
Right, but that
Yeah,
kind of goes along with the togetherness. They want to have that holiday commercial where the family's gathering at the table for Christmas dinner or
how
whatever,
early do you get those requests?
all year, really.
Hey,
Um,
taking notes.
Yeah, I mean, there's the classic Christmas in July saying that's totally true in sync, but I've also worked on some as early as February. Sometimes, again, a lot of those might be their gathering, and they're doing their slate of shows that they know aren't going to be released then, but they're getting all the production done early. And then the other trend I'm seeing right now is contemporary songs that sound vintage or sound older, so they have that kind of soul vibe, that kind of
Hmm.
production vibe of Marvin Gaye, or things like that, but they sound contemporary, so it has kind of that old soul to it.
Like the
Interesting.
new Bruno Mars Anderson Paak project.
Yes,
Yeah,
Silsonic.
Silk
That
Sonic.
actually came up in the panel earlier, and
Really?
all the panelists said the same thing, really. So sync trends, they're always ongoing. There are things that kind of pop up, but in the end, we all watch these shows, we see the movies. It's similar stuff for the last 15 years, but a little bit different.
Yeah. So my question related to that, because I think a lot of artists, one of the things that I think confuses them about sync is they often approach it thinking like, oh, well, sync is just popular music put into film and TV. But a lot of it is very different of how the process happens. It's like it has to fit the show, it has to fit the time period. You already mentioned a few things like the specific time period the show
Right.
might be about. and stuff. So the thing that I always loved about sync is it's not just about who's popular and what songs are famous. It could be about what serves the production the best, which could be
Exactly.
a number of things. What are some of the requests that you get that aren't just like alternative rock, female vocal? Like, what are some of the things that we've had recently that CD Baby's placed that's pretty unique? Like, CD Baby is the perfect client for them to ask for this type of thing.
Yeah, I placed a flamenco song in Better Call Saul. I bring that one up because along with Stranger Things, Better Call Saul, the supervision was nominated for an Emmy coming up. So, that's something that not everyone's necessarily has access to. I licensed Far Cry 6, the video game that came out at the end of last year. I licensed 12 or 13 songs on that, and it was all looking
Wow.
for kind of Latin music for like driving to in their fictional Caribbean island. That was featured in the game.
That's actually an interesting example. It's like we need drive Latin inspired driving music for our fictional island.
Right.
So it's pretty important then when people are signing up, and especially in our system, we have sort of a genre, subgenre, and mood that they fill that part out, right?
Yeah, they filled that out, and I believe we still gather sounds like last time I checked.
So is that applying to you as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I didn't know.
Because I get the reference artist, I'd say probably 90% of briefs have a reference artist or a song that they're trying to replace. So, Dua Lipa or Lizzo right now are very popular in sync. I use that as a starting point to kind of search our catalog with so many songs to see, what artists put there. Obviously, I always stress just in general, not just with our platform, but, don't say you sound like somebody that you don't.
Right.
It doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't do yourself any good. It doesn't do me any good. If you're going to another agency, it doesn't do them any good because you're going to be like, oh, I sound like the Beatles. And they listen to the track and they're like, oh, this is nothing like the Beatles. And they're, probably going to move on.
Yeah.
So making sure you put your genres and subgenres and the metadata that you can control, make sure it's authentic to what the song in the project actually is.
When classifying your music in that way, I know that like years ago when I was doing sync for CD Baby, everyone would say they sounded like Coldplay because that's
right.
That's when Coldplay still had guitars in the band.
You're dating yourself, Kevin.
But anyway, and it's like, no, just because you are a rock band does not mean you sound like Coldplay. You need a couple layers down. But how far is too far? I think the challenge for artists. It's like, well, right. I know that they're gonna know this person, but if I go down a couple levels, I'm not sure they would ever type that into a search. Like, for my band, if you like. We'd say, like, if you like Death Cab for Cutie, you'll probably like us. We don't sound just like them, but there's
right.
It would make sense for us to play a show together.
Right.
So that's kind of that's where I've always like, what's actually helpful. I could get super specific and find some obscure band from Portland that we sound like that no one's ever going to search for, and what's helpful for you?
Something like your example, bands that you would perform with live, something that a band you could go on tour with. The obscure stuff, unless the specific reference is of this obscure band, I'm not going to be searching the system for that as it sounds like artist, just because that's not going to come up. But yeah, just something in this similar genre, whatever genre you're in, bands that are kind of similar. It doesn't have to be specifically on point. The thing that I've learned when they have tracks that they're trying to replace, they're not necessarily looking for a carbon copy of that song. They're just looking for something that gives that same feel and that same vibe as the track. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Don't have it too obscure on either side of an unknown band that you guys sound very much alike, or the biggest band in the world and you just put them on there because they're the biggest band in the world and you don't sound like them at all.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a good point about, because you already mentioned that you're getting a lot of requests for like, sounds like Dua Lipa. So when an artist hears that, what and in the context of sync, what exactly is that sync person or the music supervisor? Is it meaning that only female vocals? Is it mean like it should sound pretty identical, or is it just like how do they know where that line is?
They'll usually specify male or female vocals. Sometimes they'll say, female vocals are preferred, but male are okay. Sometimes they'll say female or male vocals only. Um, so that's typically specified. Again, it's more the feeling. It's not necessarily an exact
Mhm.
replica. Sometimes on the more vintage stuff, they'll be like, we're trying to get as close as we can to this song, just because vintage songs are iconic and they want somebody to hear that and be like, oh, this sounds like this song, which is what they were trying to go for.
But they couldn't afford that original song or something?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
they can't afford it. And that's usually where reference tracks come in. Sometimes they'll try to clear it and be like, we just can't do this. Other times they already know they can't afford it. So usually that's probably the case because they're coming to a indie sync library with indie budgets. But yeah, I think they're usually just trying to replicate the feel of the song and the emotion of the song rather than having that carbon copy and same exact tempo,
Yeah.
things like that.
Okay. You started to talk about budgets. Let's
Yes.
talk about the money. All the different scenarios that you've seen come across your desk as it relates to placing indie music. I think
Right.
I have a feeling that most artists probably have misconceptions on how much money it is because they all hear about like a big placement,
Right.
like a TV commercial and think that's what they all pay. They all pay $50,000.
Right.
No. So tell us a little bit about how that works, some of the maybe the negotiation back and forth you might have with around certain placements or maybe none.
Yeah, it depends. A lot of times they have a very strict budget. They'll be like, I only have X amount of dollars for this. Other times, one I'm going to work on after this podcast of a brief that I have in 5 to 10K is the budget. So it really just kind of depends what the song is, how it's actually being used, what is my relationship with that supervisor, have I placed a song with them before, things like that. But the standard indie budget, depending on what it is, if it's a indie documentary, it's going to be lower. If it's a marquee show on Netflix, most of the time it's going to be higher. Sometimes it's not, depending on what they've spent the rest of their money on. Sometimes they're just trying to fill a spot like, oh, we only have $2,000 left, but we need 2 songs because we spent all the budget on, we'll just say Kate Bush right now because that's the hot song. Yeah.
Yeah.
On Kate Bush and Metallica, so we don't have much money to
Yeah.
fill the rest of the episodes. And their budgets for the most part stay the same per episode or for the series. So, if with Stranger Things, obviously the showrunners and the producers like, we have to have these 2 songs. Not going to say they weren't, but I highly doubt those were songs that they went out and found like, oh, these might work. I'm sure with those marquee songs, most of the time they're like, we need this song for this project. It's going to be perfect. And then the job is to get those cleared and then find the rest of the music to fill the series based off of the budget. So yeah, it really all just depends on what they use, how much of the song is. If it's an unknown song, it's probably not going to command as big of a budget as a better known song. It's just kind of the facts of sync. Even number one hits aren't for TV and film aren't making that much money per sync. It's just they get used a ton. So in the grand scheme, they're making a lot because the song's used over and over again. It's the ad world that are typically looking for those mega hits that are paying a lot of money.
Right.
And trailers pay pretty well. It's still good pay, for TV and film. I'd say anywhere between $1,000 and 10 grand is kind of the range. Sometimes they go higher than that. It just all really kind of depends.
I think one thing that's pretty incredible about what you're doing in particular here with our company, so much of the industry is about, for an artist, opportunities really open up once you've reached a certain level. So
Right.
getting signed to a licensing label, for example, or even like just getting a foot in the door with a music supervisor, likely you're not going to get there unless you've reached a certain point. But I love
Right.
that with this, it's anybody at any level could potentially be used for one of these placements. And so thanks for doing that. But also, have you found artists that have since been placed, sort of like their careers got a little more of a boost, or that they've been like, thank you so much for that, that was super valuable? Or
Yeah, definitely a lot of thank yous, and there have been some boosts usually for like the specific song that gets
Mhm.
used. But the important thing is it's money that's not there without sync. Like if your
Right.
song doesn't get synced, that's just money you just don't get. But when you get a sync, you get that money. And for a lot of our artists, it's gonna fund their next tour. It's gonna fund their
Mhm.
next record. It's gonna allow them to keep creating content and doing what they love for however much money it is. But it's
Yeah.
it's something that definitely helps them take another step forward. And it really just all kind of depends. A lot of times they get paid for background music. It might be hard to
Mhm.
tell that the song's actually being used, or identifying the song that's being used. But if you have an end credit song, season 4 of What We Do in the Shadows just debuted on Tuesday, and the end credit song for the first episode was from us. Things like that. And I've had another end credits song in What We Do in the Shadows in season one or two, I think. That one in particular, the streaming numbers boost, the YouTube plays boost, the comments on YouTube were like, "What We Do in the Shadows brought me here," things like that.
Cool.
So there is a lot of cool things that could happen besides the money.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and for artists that are listening to this, and that if you have had a placement, even if it's, not like what you're saying is a perfect one, where it's the end credits of What We Do in the Shadows, that's when you could also look in your Apple Music stats, Apple Music for Artists, and you could see how many people have Shazammed it. And
Yeah.
you can see in Alexa data in Amazon Music for Artists, and potentially people saying an increase in people asking to play the song. So there's some data feeds that you have access to that you can correlate some of the traffic from. And plus, like you said, comments, if it's available on YouTube, or people might
Yeah,
be
and
able to find it.
fan interaction, that's so invaluable for our artists. Making new fans and interacting with them, you never know who's going to buy the next record, who's going to buy merch, who's going to come out to your show. It's just another discovery tool as well.
So, Brett, what we get this question asked all the time. What, if anything, can artists do? They've checked the box. They want to be a part of CD Baby Sync licensing. Is there anything they can or should do to make the most of that opportunity?
That's hard to say. I think for sync, the most important thing is, even before you sign up, it's writing the most authentic music to yourself. Don't write for sync. They could tell. They're going to find a song that's authentic, that's going to give the same vibe, the same feeling. And also make sure your production's good. It's mixed, it's mastered. Make sure you do the best production that you can with your budget and time and facilities, whatever you got. If it's at home, if it's at actual studio, make sure you're doing everything that I know we talk about for the pre-release strategies. Make sure you're doing all those as well, because that's really what's valuable in sync. Supervisors and editors, they're looking for something that's really authentic, that sounds like the artist is really putting everything into it, and not just phoning in a song because they think they could write a catchy chorus and get a bunch of like cheesy catchy chorus and get a bunch of syncs. But yeah, as far as once it's in our catalog, again, when you're signing up, make sure the metadata is there. I have plenty of ways to discover new music, but again, with a catalog so big, it's also hard to find certain things. But again, our net of what actually comes in from music supervisors is so broad. I've surfaced a ton of music and licensed a ton of music that I never thought I would. I've also had songs that I thought are a home run that haven't been licensed.
What were some of those things that you thought wouldn't be licensed that you'd licensed?
The chicken dance. uh, localized stuff too. Things like in Tagalog, which is the Philippines language. Licensed a bunch of music for that for SEAL Team a couple years ago. Just stuff that you don't traditionally think of as a sync song. I license a lot of that. You hear all the stuff that's up front. A lot of people don't really pay attention to the stuff that's in the background. And we do both of those. We do the songs that are up front. We do the songs that are in the background. So
Yeah, that's a good point. If you're an artist that hasn't been thinking about, or sync's kind of a new idea, everything you see on TV or film, even though it sounds like, oh, there's music coming from the jukebox in the background or something, that's placed there. It's not in the scene when the actors are acting. Everything you hear is, especially as it relates to music and sound, is done later. And there's music that gets used that's just background music. There's stuff that's up front, that, like Kate Bush, that gets real prominent focus and is part of the plot. But it's usually stuff that's more in the background that that a lot of artists find themselves in.
I really want to make one of those trailer songs that's like a cover of like a Guns N' Roses, but it's just like me singing really sweet and then it has like the you know what I'm talking
Oh
about?
yeah,
Drops.
I get quite a few of those searches. They want, there are a lot of, they want trailerized
I'm just gonna
versions
start
of
pumping out a
songs.
bunch and sending them your way.
There you go. Hey, if you do it
Don't
with
be
Guns N'
shy on
Roses, I
covers,
want to
too.
hear it.
Yeah, I would like to hear it too. Don't be shy on covers too. I mean, don't be like, oh, I'm just gonna write out and put out covers. I'm gonna be a cover artist unless that's what you are already doing. But I think we've talked about the importance of covers in these podcasts, on the blog, things like that. They're important in sync too. I do quite a bit of covers. I think you guys mentioned, you already talked about The Handmaid's Tale. That was a cover that we licensed.
Coldplay cover, right?
Coldplay cover, yep. More of a kind of trailerized version, but also a lot of times with covers, they could clear the publishing, but they don't have the budget to clear the master to go MFN, which is most favored nations, meaning the price is the same for both master and publishing. But a lot of times if it's a huge song, if they're spending 6 figures on the publishing, they can't do that on the master as well. So they're looking for that master, or they're wanting just a unique version of a song that everybody knows. So they'll be looking for a different master than the original artist.
Excellent. Yeah, that's all great info, Brett. Any final words about sync licensing, what we're doing at CD Baby?
It's also important just to think about when you're opting in. It's more than just TV and film and commercials. There's a lot of other opportunities that we're consistently working on, whether it's background music that generates steady income, video games, podcasts, things like that. So it's, there's a lot that sync encompasses just in general for licensing and licensing music and how that works. It's always evolving. New things are popping up all the time, metaverse stuff, things like that, people creating things for the metaverse, for all the other platforms that are doing similar things. So it's more than just what you think of as sync. It's now more than just TV and film and commercials. There's a lot of opportunities within sync licensing, and we're always looking to exploit the catalog we have for opportunities for our artists. I would also say most of my work is reactive to briefs, but there is a handful of supervisors that come to me seeing our name listed either at the PROs. If it's a publishing admin client, they'll see CD Baby listed and they'll be like, we want the song, or they see CD Baby monetizing on YouTube. So it's something that if you're doing this and have the rights to do it, you should be doing everything that CD Baby offers. All the licensing aspects, the YouTube monetization, the Facebook monetization, the publishing admin, because all those things end up playing a role in the end when it comes to sync licensing and your music being discovered.
Excellent. That's a good point. All right. Well, Brett, thanks for being on the podcast. This has been great because we especially lately, when we do the live streams and stuff, we've been getting asked a lot about CD Baby sync licensing. So there you have it. That's how it works. Make sure you're opted in.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, that was great hearing from Brett and about CD Baby sync licensing. Lots of cool stuff happening there. Again, if you have not opted in, it's free. There's no additional charge. Just log into your account and opt in your tracks, and you'll be a part of that program. So a reminder, if you'd like to call in, ask us a question, weigh in on a topic, if you've had a sync placement you want to tell us about, please do. You can call our listener line at 360-524-2209 or email us at podcast@cdbabypodcast.com. And we also are accepting scam emails because that's become a funny segment, because as artists, we're getting them all the time. And we've had the insanely ridiculous to the, this is borderline, I can't tell if it's real or not. And finally, don't forget, DIY Musician Conference is coming up August 26th through 28th, Austin, Texas. You can attend in Austin or you can watch online. One ticket gets you either option. So DIYmusiciancon.com. And yeah, Christina and I will be there. You can hang with us.
The pool party will not be live streamed.
The pool party will not be live streamed for legal reasons. Things get messy.
So if you want to be there, you got to be there.
That's right.
Or join us virtually. You'll have just as much fun.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. We'll catch you next time. Take it easy.